Amazing. So just in terms of what we're discussing tonight, so I'll go through who Citizen Zoo are and some of the work that we're doing here in London and further afield. I'll then give a very brief background into water voles and their ecology before moving on to our specific projects and some of the activities that we've been doing for our water vole release, and then how that links with dogs and water voles, and then more broadly our engagement strategies try and overcome some of the issues that they potentially pose to water voles and other wildlife in nature reserves. So just quickly in terms of who we are, so we're a wildlife conservation organisation. We're a fairly new and young organisation. We were founded in 2016, but we have a specific focus on rewilding, and we do that through community-led species reintroduction projects and habitat restoration projects. So here in London, we are currently working on a beaver reintroduction project over in Ealing, and this is a collaborative project with some other organisations called Ealing Wildlife Group, as well as the Friends of Horsenden Hill, as well as Ealing Council, and with the support of the Beaver Trust and the Mayor of London. And we're working to reintroduce either a pair of beavers or a family of beavers back onto a 10-hectare site in the Greenford area called Paradise Fields. And what we're trying to do is to showcase the incredible abilities of these animals in terms of wetland creation, and what that means in terms of boosting biodiversity, but also the benefits that brings to us in terms of their dams actually holding up floodwater, filtering off pollutants, and also increasing sedimentation over time, and what that means for carbon sequestration. And it's a fairly unique project in terms of enclosed reintroductions, in that it'll be fully public accessible. So members of the public will be able to walk freely through the site to actually experience firsthand or the rewilded landscape by the beavers, to be able to really get to grips with what these animals can do and the amazing behaviours they have. But obviously, as part of that, that brings about issues in terms of people and human-wildlife conflict, as well as dogs as well. So it's another case where we need to think about how we manage that in an urban landscape. Also in southwest London, we're working on Kingston's largest nature reserve. So it's called Tolworth Court Farm Fields, which is a 42-hectare size nature reserve. So it's a fairly sizable piece of land. And what we're trying to do there is emulate methods and techniques that have been used in rural rewilding projects. So places like Knepp Wildland in Sussex, or Wild Ken Hill in Norfolk, which has been featured on Spring Watch over the past few seasons. And start to think about mixed grazing regimes, so things like pigs, cattle, ponies, and the grazing pressures that they bring about, and what that means for driving habitat creation and restoration as well. But again, that also brings a lot of complexities within an urban area with high footfall, but also potentially, well, with lots of dog walkers as well. So thinking about how we overcome some of those potential issues and conflict areas as well. And then slightly further afield, we're working on this very handsome species of grasshopper called the large marsh grasshopper, which was it's the UK's largest species, but it's also one of our rarest. So it used to be found right the way throughout the south of England, but due to degradation and destruction of its preferred habitats in the form of peat bogs and wet fens, as of 2018, it was found in just 3 locations in the southwest, so in Dorset, New Forest, and the Somerset levels. And for the past 5 years now, I should say, we've actually been working with members of the local community in Norfolk to actually teach them how to home rear grasshoppers right from eggs through to adulthood, and then release them back into the wild. So with the help of just 30 volunteers, we've released over 4,000 individual hoppers back into 4 sites, and we've now got a self-sustaining population of large marsh grasshopper, our main pilot study site, which is really positive. Just shows kind of what you can achieve with embedding local communities in wildlife conservation. And then also here in London, we do a lot of nature engagement work, particularly in the Kingston area. So working with the Kingston Carers Network in particular, taking out their young carers on nature restoration and nature engagement days, and also behind the scenes visits to a place like the Natural History Museum. And we also run a very small nature reserve or wildlife garden called Edith Gardens, which we use as an ecotherapy site. So working alongside the local branch of Mind and a charity called Kingston Centre for Independent Living. But what I'll be talking to you today is mainly around the water vole project, which is a water vole reintroduction project. But I'll just go into a little bit of background in terms of water voles and their ecology. If there's one thing that you can take from this, I hope you take from this presentation in terms of background of their ecology, it's the ratty, the much loved ratty from Kenneth Graham's Wind in the Willows is indeed actually not a rat. He was in fact a water vole. I know a lot of people do refer to them as water rats because they are similar in appearance, and they also can often be found in aquatic ecosystems, but they are very much different, separate species. So if you remember one thing from this, please remember that Ratty from the Wind in the Willows is in fact a water vole. So just a little bit more background. So a water vole, its Latin name is Arbicola amphibius. It is the largest of our 4 native species of water vole, So we've got the common vole, the bank vole, the field vole, and the water vole. Interestingly, there's 2 genetically distinct subpopulations here in the UK. So we've got the Scottish population and the English population, and that's down to 2 separate colonization events. The first of which being the Scottish population around about 28,000 years ago, and the English population around about 12,000 years ago. And you might be wondering why I've got a photo of a woolly mammoth here. And this is just for context, because carbon dating shows that woolly mammoths existed here in the UK right up to around about 14,000 years ago. So to put that into context, they would have been roaming this landscape around about the same time as we've had water voles here. So they're a really historical and important part of our ecology here in the UK. Just a little bit further back, general background. So as I mentioned, they're the largest of our vole species. They can weigh anywhere between 140 to 350 grams, and they can grow generally up to about the size of an adult hand, with the males being slightly larger. They've got the longest tail of any of our vole species, which grows to around about half the length of their body. And it's a good indicator of telling the difference between a rat and a water vole, because a rat's tail would generally be about the length of its body. Also, a rat's tail will tend to be pink and almost kind of scaly, whereas a water vole's tail tends to have fur. Similarly, its ears have fur, and so do their paws as well. They've also got a much more rounded body shape, as you can see in this photo here. They've kind of got chubby cheeks and tucked away ears as well. Interestingly, they've got open-rooted teeth, which continue to grow, so they have to continue eating to make sure that they're eroding down their teeth. Otherwise, they can actually grow right the way through their brain, which could potentially kill them. So it's important to have lots of vegetation and things for them to nibble on. In captivity, they've been known to live up to around about 3 years, but that's incredibly rare. And out in the wild, they will typically live for a matter of months at a time. In the winter, they actually have an 80% die-off, so you can lose 80% of your water vole population. But the good thing is that they bounce back pretty speedily in the spring and summer months. So they can breed up to 8 times in one season with 2 to 5 pups per litter. So they do bounce back pretty quickly. In terms of where you would find water voles, they're typically associated with wetland areas, so rivers, streams, or lakes or ponds. Typically within 3 meters of a bank. And this is kind of typical ideal water vole habitat that you can see here. They need burrowable banks, so soil banks that they can create complex nests within. They need open areas of vegetation for them to feed on, but also to shelter from predatory species. And they've also been known to actually climb up trees as well, particularly in the autumn and winter months when vegetation is at its lowest and they're looking for potential food sources, so things like fruits and nuts as well to feed on. Skip one. So they're a herbivore, and they've been recorded to eat 227 different species of plants. They're not particularly fussy, which is great. Some of their favorites include willow herb, clovers, loosestrife, meadowsweet, and water crowfoot. So not particularly rare species, which is really important if you can kind of provide the basics in terms of a few important plant species. You can support water voles. As they are herbivores, they are important seed dispersers as well. They help to move seeds throughout the landscape, which can help to increase plant diversity within an ecosystem. And they need to eat around about 80% of their body weight on a daily basis, which is an incredible amount of food, if you think about it in terms of plant matter. In terms of their importance within the wider ecosystem, so the main thing I mentioned that they're quite a sizable animal, particularly in terms of voles, as far as voles go. But that in itself makes them incredibly important food source for many predatory species. So things like herons, kestrels, or foxes will predate on them, even potentially grass snakes, which you can see here. But also there are issues with domestic cats and dogs as well, which I'll come on to shortly. They also can support other species. So grass snakes will actually live in their burrows, which is quite an interesting kind of relationship they can have. And I've already mentioned they are a valuable seed dispersers as well. But last but not least, they really are just a joy to see in the wider landscape. And as I've mentioned, something that's been present within the UK for 28,000 years. So very much something that belongs here and a species that we hope to see bouncing back in the coming years. So I just mentioned that they potentially need to bounce back, and the reason for that is because they have suffered quite sharp declines, so much so that they are now known as the UK's fastest declining mammal. So they suffered a 94% loss in their range or in territory surveyed between 1989 and 1998. And similarly, they suffered a 30% decline in their range between 2006 and 2015. And recent suggestions show that their population might be as low as around about 77,000 animals in the wild, which for a rodent species is incredibly low and just shows that they really are on the brink of extinction. And the cause of this are kind of very much varying, but during the 20th century, at least, it was very much down to habitat loss and degradation. So I mentioned earlier they require banks that they can actually burrow into and thick vegetation. As we've canalized lots of our rivers, so as you can see in this photo here, or even undergrounded them in lots of our urban areas, we're just removing a lot of potential areas they can burrow into or feed on or shelter from predators, which has had a detrimental impact. Similarly, pollution events can reduce the amount of vegetation, which again has a similar effect on water voles. So we saw a steady decline kind of throughout the 20th century. But then around about the 1970s when, but the main cause of their declines after that point is very much down to this species you can see in the bottom right here, which is American mink. It's a non-native invasive species, which has become widespread throughout the countryside from the kind of 1970s onwards, when we had around about 800 fur farms across the UK. Lots of accidental escapees, but also intentional releases by animal rights activists has meant that they're now found all over the UK. And unlike our native aquatic mustelid, an otter, they're a much smaller animal, which means they can actually gain access to a water vole burrow, and they can wipe out an entire colony within a matter of weeks. So they're a really, really efficient predator, and they're having a devastating impact, not just on water voles, but on other species found all along our ecosystems. So things like ground nesting birds really suffer from American mink. So they are a voracious predator. So just moving on to our project, just a quick overview. So it's a community-led project. As I mentioned at the start, we very much pride ourselves of embedding the community at the heart of all of our projects. And it focuses on a river called the Hogsmill, which can be found in southwest London, in the Kingston area. And in line with wider trends of waterfall declines right across the country, we lost our waterfowl population on the Hogsmill in 2017. And that was down to a range of factors, including general habitat degradation, but primarily from American mink, which were the kind of final nail in the coffin for that population. But really interesting, there is quite a long-standing cultural heritage with waterfowls on the river. Not only do we know that there was lots of water voles to be found on the river as little as 30 years ago, but many of you might be familiar with this painting here, which is Ophelia by Millet, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood painter from the 19th century. And not only, well, what's amazing about this painting, it was actually painted on the Hogsmill River. So it's a really good snapshot of what the habitat would have looked like back in the 19th century. So filled with things like dog rose, you've got water forget-me-nots, you've got water crowfoot, and a kind of like thriving ecosystem with lots of life there. And what's really incredible is actually, if you look at Millet's diaries, he actually documented how he intended to include a water vole as part of this, as part of the scene. And there's lots of sketches of him actually trying to improve his drawings of water voles and talking about how the river was absolutely teeming with the species when he was out on the river. So we know that it's got a rich history with water voles on the river, which is quite cool. And then even more incredibly, when they've done x-rays of this painting, they've actually found that in the top right here, there was originally actually a water vole included, but he was advised by his contemporaries in the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood to remove it because it had too much of a similarity to a rat. So that's just a real shame in my opinion, but just another amazing bit of history, and yeah, lovely kind of link with the project on the river. So we launched the project 2 years after they went locally extinct, and it began with the training of 60 volunteers to carry out a very simple methodology for actually surveying the whole 10-kilometre stretch of river, looking for viable habitat. And so we dissected the river up into 100-metre sections, and we had volunteers going out over the summer to go out and actually look for viable habitat. And we used a traffic light color code system to look for optimum, or viable habitat, so in green, suboptimum in amber, and then poor habitat in red, and then also inaccessible areas here in blue. And we chose our introduction site to be a non-public access area behind the Thames Water Sewage Treatment Works, which may sound slightly odd, but it's a non-public access site. It's a really lovely stretch of river, and also it's really well linked up with quite a few nature reserves that we were working on, and lots of local groups also work on. So it made sense in terms of as a wildlife corridor and good connectivity for the waterfowls to be able to disperse out, which is really important. But one of the primary reasons we actually chose that site was because it's not public access, and I'll come on to issues around human footfall as well as dog footfall and what that means for waterfowls shortly. But one of the main reasons was to have it as a non-public access site to allow that population to really bed in there. And so after surveying the river, we went on to create a number of different project teams, getting people involved depending on their expertise or areas of interest or things they wanted to chip in with. So we created a community engagement team. So for example, we have teams of volunteers who support us to go out to various nature engagement days. So this example here on the top left is us at Thames Water Open Day last year, doing some interactive games with some of the local children. They also helped us to put on our festival, as we called it, which was a festival to celebrate the release of waterfowls back onto the river. And this is Christine and her husband showcasing their amazing waterfowl mask making station, which was part of the engagement for the day as well, which was really well received. We also have a fundraising team. So these are people who enjoy doing a bit of research for us about potential grants that we can apply for to help fund the project. But also amazingly, back at the end of 2020, they helped us to spearhead a crowdfunder campaign to raise funds for paying for the actual waterfowls themselves, for the breeding and release of them. And this is just a snapshot of one of our 12 Days of the Hogs Mill social media campaign images, which was, again, it was all kind of dreamt up and spearheaded by the local community. So it was really fantastic to have them at the heart of that. Really importantly as well, we have a habitat restoration team. So these are people who come out and help us do various bits of work on the river, from litter picking right through to invasive species removal. So taking out things like Himalayan balsam and backfilling with native river plants that provide really good food for waterfowls, as well as other wildlife out on the river. And then also, crucially, and this is absolutely vital, we have an invasive species monitoring team looking for signs of American mink. So here you can see a mink raft being deployed, and this is essentially a floating raft, one of 10 we have, which is looking for, it's equipped with a clay pad inside that picks up footprints of anything that walks over the top of that clay pad. And we've got volunteers that go out on a weekly basis looking at potential prints and looking for most importantly, looking for potentially mink prints, which I'm very glad to say we do get very rarely. We've only had couple of instances of passing animals moving through, so really positive and a great engagement tool for local people to get involved with as well. So after 3 years of hard work, it all came to fruition in August of last year, when we finally released 101 waterfowls back onto the river, which was a really exciting week. It involved quite a lot of work. So we had 75 volunteers helping us throughout the 7-day period, which firstly involved setting up these pens here, which were all housed from anywhere between 2 to 5 animals inside. And these were to allow the voles to acclimatize to their new surroundings. And we had volunteers on a daily basis coming out and helping us feed the voles, making sure they were in as best condition as absolutely possible, before eventually opening up the doors on the 6th day to allow them to move into their new environment. And as I mentioned earlier, they do have a quite a high DARF in the winter, but really excitingly, we started to see positive signs of them being bouncing back and being on the river. So we know that the population has made it through that difficult winter period, is bouncing back now, which is fantastic for the project. So getting on to kind of the important stuff for the context of this call is the impacts on dogs. And I thought the best way to kind of showcase this would be to do a kind of, well, a comparison here. So this is actually from the same river. It's not a London-based river, but obviously the same values hold true. This is a river close to where I grew up in West Oxfordshire. On the left, you've got very prime watervole habitat with lots of emergent vegetation, burrowable banks, lots of place for them to shelter from predatory species, and lots of potential food in kind of slow-moving, sinuous water. On the right, this is literally about, I don't know, maybe 200 yards upstream. You've got a heavily poached area, and this is purely from human footfall and dog footfall. And the biggest impact this has is it just removes any potential for voles to escape predation. There's nowhere they can hide there from potentially from predatory native species, but also even potentially from dogs as well, which can have been known to predate on them. So you're really reducing the potential for viable watervole habitat through that kind of ongoing poaching. So yeah, hopefully that kind of illustrates one of the biggest kind of risk factors for dogs on watervoles. I mentioned obviously dogs have been known to potentially, or have been in the past, predated on watervoles, whilst it seems like it's more anecdotal evidence, and it's kind of unlikely in terms of the speed of kind of having to be able to do that, having the ability to do that. It has been known to happen, and obviously if you've got areas like this, it could make it potentially more likely as well. So it's really key that we can try and keep some of those areas of banks where you've got watervoles very much free from kind of human and dog footfall, to make sure they stay as full of vegetation as absolutely possible. And this is probably one of the least known ones, but it definitely was for myself. I've been a dog owner. My family have always had dogs, and I now have my own dog. But this is something I absolutely never knew about, and I never knew the potential impacts of this. But this is what we kind of call the unseen impacts of potentially of dogs, more typically on wildlife, as opposed to watervoles more specifically. But this is around flea treatment. And more specifically the insecticide called fipronil, which is essentially a nerve agent which is highly toxic to insects, hence the fact it's so good at killing ticks and fleas. But the impact of that is it can have a wider implications for invertebrates in the wider ecosystem. And there was a really interesting study back in 2020 that found that from 99% of samples taken in 20 rivers across the UK, they found fipronil in 99% of those samples. So we know that it is widespread within aquatic ecosystems, and the impact of that is potentially incredibly severe. So we know things like damselflies and dragonflies can live for multiple years at the bottom of our rivers. And if you've got this highly toxic chemical finding its way into the water system, is potentially having huge impacts on those freshwater invertebrates. So it's just something to be kind of aware of. And one of the key things that we've been trying to educate through our nature or dog walker engagement work is not just being aware of this, but also finding ways to mitigate some of those potential impacts. So one of which being, if you do have a dog and you've recently treated it for, recently used flea treatment, don't let it enter a water body for up to 5 days after that flea treatment. Similarly, if you're going to give your dog a bath or a shower, don't give them a bath or a shower for up to 5 days after that flea treatment, because again, it can find its way into the gutters, and then it'll eventually find its way into our waterways, having a potentially even more kind of ubiquitous impact at various areas along a river or wetland ecosystem. We also would suggest potentially looking out for like kind of sacrificial areas. So as I mentioned in the last slide, dogs can well, obviously dogs can have a big impact on the trampling of vegetation. Obviously dogs also do love water, so I'm very much not campaigning to say dogs shouldn't go in water, but what I would suggest is looking for, or if you're managing an area which has water bodies, is looking to create kind of sacrificial areas which can be trampled and also can have that kind of increased exposure to things like fipronil through the treatments. So having sacrificial areas, then it means that other areas can say kind of saved for wildlife and prevented from some of these wider issues. So in terms of kind of traditional management of dogs in parks or in nature reserves, a lot of it has been very much down to signage. So this is a photo from the park just opposite me in Mayo Park in Southeast London, which is kind of standard engagement with dog walkers around about picking up after your dog's poo. And also a maximum number of dog walkers, which I think is good guidance for anyone walking dogs as well. In terms of a kind of nature reserve environment, typically we've been, was typically used is a thing called dead hedging. So dead hedging is essentially two lines of parallel stakes, which you backfill with dead wood material. That not only acts as a natural barrier, but it also provides really good habitat for things like birds, invertebrates, and even fungus as well. So it's kind of has a double kind of a benefit to it in terms of preventing both humans and dogs from getting down to the banks and potentially trampling along the bank sides, but also creating a little bit more habitat as well. So this has kind of been the traditional management, which I think you'd see in a lot of different parks here in London or in nature reserves. But one of the things that we found is that often, particularly the places that we've worked on, signs have often ended up vandalized, and in particular, our dead hedging has often ended up vandalized. Not necessarily from dog walkers, but from people who don't necessarily understand the purpose of them. So we really wanted to make sure that we had a strategy in place that we could try and engage the local community to educate about the reasons for why we were putting these sorts of infrastructure in place and the purpose for them, and hopefully to kind of make sure that they were on board with that as well. And so from that, we wanted to launch a dog walker engagement strategy, which is really all about how do we empower not just conservationists, but dog walkers to actually engage with other dog walkers to spread the word and actually make a difference. Because I think in lots of conservation circles, it can often happen where dog walkers and conservationists can often butt heads around about the management of spaces, particularly in our urban areas where there's lots of people living, so you're likely to have lots of people using these areas for different purposes. So it's very much about how do we embed or make local dog walkers very much the ambassadors of this strategy. So one of the key things that we've done is to actually run nature walks, but not just nature walks for people, but for people and their dogs. So we run 3 of these over the past year, or actually over the past few months, where I go out with my dog as well as my colleague, and we get local people to come out with their dogs, and we take them on a trip around the nature reserve to talk to them about our waterfowl reintroduction project. In particular, the impacts on water voles, highlighting some of the unseen impacts that I mentioned with fipronil and flea treatments, and then also thinking about some of the management techniques we put in place. So for example, in this photo here, you can't quite see it because the vegetation has grown up around it, but there is in fact a dead hedge there. And that dead hedge was actually one of the ones that had been vandalized on previous occasions. But we've actually noticed a reduction in the amount of this as we've begun to engage more proactively with the dog walking community, even from not just from these sessions, but also when we're building dead hedges out on site, actually talking to dog walkers and explaining what we're doing and the purpose of it. And we've really felt that we do feel that's having a real benefit in terms of spreading the word and helping to educate others and getting it further afield as well. But we also involve other educational pieces around about walking dogs in nature reserves. So in this specific nature reserve called Rose Walk, we're very lucky to have yellow meadow anthills, which can potentially be up to hundreds of years old. And so we highlight on those walks not just kind of the incredible ecology of those anthills, but also the ways in which dogs can potentially impact them. So particularly larger dogs, if they can potentially trample on them. So just thinking about keeping your dog either to the path or like kind of within a safe distance from those anthills. But also in particular thinking about potential poo and on them as well, which can potentially be highly toxic to kind of fragile ecosystems like that. So it's very much about using the ecology of those local areas to engage people, but then linking that to potential conflict and thinking about ways that you can overcome it as well. And then one of the key ways that we've well, got the message out even further is through a dog walker leaflet. And so we call this Wild Walking, a Responsible Dog Owner's Guide. It's very much about highlighting kind of that ancestral link of dogs right to wolves, and the kind of innate kind of fear that wildlife do have in general of dogs, whether it be rational or not, depending on whether that dog potentially does pose a threat to them or not. They don't perceive it in any different way. They just perceive that as a potential threat. And that can have major impacts on the ways that they feed, the ways that they breed, and the general overall success of that ecosystem. So we tried to highlight that, and in particular in relation to water voles, and then just come up with a series of 10 very simple steps or guides for a wildlife friendly walking with your dog. And these are all tips that we've collated from local members of the community, dog walkers and non-dog walkers, about ways that you can be slightly more wildlife friendly when walking your dog. So anything from switching to a non-insecticide flea treatment to, as I mentioned earlier, not letting your dog in for 5 days after in the river after being treated, and to simple things like keeping your dog on a lead when you're in a specific nature reserve or a nature area that is just for nature as opposed to a recreational zone. So there's lots of different tips there, but one of the key things that we try to do with this is to get feedback from dog walkers as well. And one of the main things we found that a lot of the guides or the tips that we've been given are quite how should I put this, very much a kind of do's and don'ts as opposed to suggestions. So one of the things that we're trying to do, trying to soften that language when we do a reprint of these to make sure that it's less us kind of telling people what and what not to do, and make it more of a suggestion and something they want to proactively engage with as well. And in terms of, so next steps, we, on our public access site, so Rose Walker mentioned, we're going to hopefully be doing a lot more dead hedging as well, just to try and protect some more of those via, well, really important banks for water voles and other wildlife as well. And then also, as part of that, creating or helping to establish and even signposting kind of sacrificial areas where we know dogs are going to be getting into the river, and we can kind of promote it to be, you know, this is the area we think that it would be best for your dog to go in to have as little harm on wildlife as absolutely possible. We also are looking to secure further funding for ongoing dog walks. So these are, as I said, the nature walks that we've been running, so we can continue running them and continue to spread the word. We also want to recruit more dog walkers to actually carry the message, and that will mainly be done through those dog walks, but even potentially having dog walkers to even run them kind of separate from ourselves, so they can actually engage the local community as well. And then finally, just continuing to distribute our leaflet further afield and making sure that we're improving it to make sure the language is better, and then to make sure that we're maximizing its impact as much as possible. And that is the end of the presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions. I will just stop sharing now.
Great, thank you very much, Ben. That was really interesting. Yeah, some really good updates and also some really useful tips as well. Does anyone have any questions for Ben? Either, I think, yeah, put your hand up using the mechanism or wave at the screen for me.
How do you use the mechanism? Oh, is that reactions?
Yeah, well, if you have a question, I can, Joanna, why don't you go ahead?
Right, okay. I've got several. I was a couple of things that I've noticed. I recently, last week, visited a friend in Yate. She used to be the mayor of Yate, which is in near Bristol. They have fenced off areas for skylarks, ground nesting within their sort of wilder things, compared with, say, for example, the National Trust on the Cornish Cliffs. And when people say, oh, well, most dog walkers would do that, you only need 1 or 2 rogue dog walkers, and there are plenty of those. Just 1 or 2, I'll throw it out there. The rain runoff you did, Himalayan balsam, I'd just like to know, if you clear it from an area, the whole point is the seeds go downstream. So I don't know about mink, whether you're allowed to trap and kill. The other thing about the flea treatment, I don't know whether it's possible to canvass vets across London and see if they can put notices up. And I know some of the vets have been taken over by things like Medivet, and they have a hand in glove thing with some of the pharmaceutical giants. But you've also, whether you can contact vets, kennel club, and some of the pharmaceutical industry to at least put those notices prominently on their products. Again, if you're going to publicise it, has anybody tried going into schools? I'm a retired teacher, as I said earlier, an environmental educator, and if you go into schools and if you're able to do talks, especially if you can bring a dog into schools, and even a pet vole, water vole, that might help enormously. Just some comments out there. Okay.
I think so. Just to go on a couple of those points. In terms of the Himalayan balsam, yeah, you're right. It's an ongoing issue. Luckily, the Hogsmill River has a really super catchment partnership, which has got quite good joined up thinking in terms of tackling it at various flashpoints. Admittedly, the area that we do work on is downstream, so we do we kind of feel the brunt of it at the worst point. But there is considerate improvements being made from ongoing management of it year on year. And actually on the river, Southeast Rivers Trust, who we work with, they've actually trialed this year a fungal treatment for it as well. So we're hoping to see what impact that has on the river, to see if it does make a difference going forward. In terms of mink trapping, yep, that is very much part of the protocol. We run on a protocol where we actually contact different captive facilities that actually house mink as part of an engagement piece to educate people about the impacts they have. And we every 6 months we get in touch with them to see if we ever did catch a mink, whether they could house one. But unfortunately, the protocol then, after if they can't take one, is actually to dispatch, and that is just for legal purposes. It's an invasive scheduled invasive species, so it has to be dispatched of humanely. But we do that through all the correct protocol, but luckily up till now we've not had to do that on the river. So we've remained mink-free apart from a few moving animals passing through. In terms of reaching out to vets, yeah, that's a really good point, and actually an area that we are really quite keen to look into. Quite interestingly, we do work with a vet part of our beaver reintroduction project, so it's potentially someone we could speak to about that and try and disseminate some of that information kind of more broadly within that sector, because I think that'd be a really key place to go to in terms of getting it to the right people. And then I think the last one was around schools. Yeah, we do quite a lot of school engagement. But I would love to take my dog in. I think he'd get a bit overexcited. No, I don't know how that would go, but if that was a possibility, that would be incredible. We are looking to do more school engagement. My colleague Elliot, who might be on the call, I'm not sure actually, but he has done quite a bit in the past with schools, and actually he did one out on the Wandle, the River Wandle school local to there, doing some nature engagement around waterfalls, and they actually, off the back of that, they ran a campaign to get waterfalls back, and had a signature campaign that I think got over 100,000 signatures, and it made national news, which was quite incredible. So hopefully there'll be a bit of a catalyst there for maybe getting some reintroductions onto other catchments such as the Wandle as well. But yeah, very much something that we're looking into to have increased capacity for within Citizen Zoo, going further down the line. And actually we have had local schools out on the river, particularly helping with the dead hedging in the winter as well. Kind of fairly simple tasks, just processing up some blackthorn and helping us to backfill those dead hedges, which was quite good fun. So hopefully that answers all your questions.
Yeah, thank you. I've just said I'd be happy to help with some of those things when I find time, but also the whether this sort of thing goes on. You were talking about Mayo Park, so I live in southeast London, so it would be nice if something like that were done as well. But just if you want to take my details.
Yeah, amazing. If you want to just pop me a message in the chat, and I can can follow up
Yeah,
after.
yeah.
Amazing.
Okay.
Tanya, I think you were next.
Hiya. So I am a professional dog walker and behavioural trainer, and I'm actually quite close to the Hogs Mill myself, where I do dog walking. And I actually live on the Wandle in near Hackbridge. And my son's actually going out on a Wandle trip to learn about the Wandle in a couple of weeks. But what I was going to suggest is, if you know the Hogs Mill, you probably know the Non-Such Park Dog Walkers group. I'm the admin on there. I've got quite a wide reach in the local area as well. So if you want to do some sort of collaboration where we can educate, so I can put education into my puppy classes, my obedience lessons. I can do a post on my Facebook page, and I also run Merton Dog Watch, Sutton Dog Watch. So I've got quite a wide reach along some of the rivers. So if there's something you'd like to do in that area, I'll happily collaborate with you on that. Also, education is great, but as you've probably heard, there's a lot of like dog attacks and stuff going on as well. Now, obviously, the people I work with and the people that contact me are responsible dog owners. It's really hard to educate people that just don't want to know, they don't care, and they're the people we have to reach.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that is the most difficult bit as well. But just to go back to your earlier point as well, that's amazing you say that, because you're literally the exact sort of kind of dog ambassador that we would love to work with. So yeah, if we could collaborate in some way, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I've also got a network of trainers all across the country. We up to Scotland, Sussex, down south to Devon. So I'm sure I can get some of those to share any posters or anything that is needed. Also, there was someone that put in the chat, being dyslexic myself, it's hard to read things when they pop up, but someone posted about the colours, orange on white doesn't really work when you're dyslexic.
It's me, and I thoroughly agree. Absolutely, it's
I don't know if anyone noticed, but when it popped up, I went right up to the screen because I couldn't read it. So colour scheme might need a bit of a change there.
Definitely.
That's really interesting to know, because I would not say so.
I'm happy to give you some dyslexia help as well. I've sent my details. Yeah.
And I collaborate with 2 local vets as well. So I'll have a chat with them about maybe educating, like, I know not to bath my dog within 5 days of flea treatment in case it comes off. So maybe they could add that it could do damage to other animals. And obviously dog lovers will say, oh, I won't bath my dog, that kind of thing. So I'll have a word with them. I also run some local dog shows where you could come along and have a stall, charity stall, and educate people. I mean, we have like 400 dogs that come to our show sometimes. And we do have one coming up on the 8th, 9th of July.
Amazing.
But again, give us a shout. I'll be there. If you can't get a stall in, you can come and stand under my gazebo. So if you want to do something like that, education's key, as you say. Lots of people come to the Morden Family Fun Day. I'm sure we can get you in. So if I'm going to have to go and put my son to bed in a minute. But if I put my email on the chat, send me an email and send me any leaflets and anything you want, and I can shoot them off to people as well.
Brilliant. That's much appreciated. That'd be brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, sounds great.
No problem. And thank you for the education.
Thanks. Okay, Pat, I think you are next.
Got it. Just to follow on with some of the things Tanya mentioned, dog walkers are very opinionated and aggressive, and if questioned about their dog's behavior, don't tell me what to do. You ask them to clean up politely, and you get a diatribe of abuse. How do you get them to acknowledge the impact on wildlife and their dog's impact? And they have the, they have the belief that they have a right to let their dog run in the river, chase wildlife, whatever. And I think that, there's a huge barrier. And I think we need to figure out ways to overcome that. And I don't know what that is. And I think that's what we're all experiencing.
I think before we let Ben answer, I was just going to say that that's one of the reasons why we've got this working group now, is that I think particularly, post-COVID, I think a lot of people quite rightly sought some companionship in their homes if they were feeling isolated, and many people got dogs who maybe weren't familiar with the responsibilities and the, what it takes to be a responsible dog owner. And so I think particularly as, I had a dog pre-pandemic, and I'm comparing what I observed in my local park pre-pandemic with during and post-pandemic, and it feels like there's not as much responsibility amongst the broad, cohort of dog owners. And that's why we decided to form this group to try to work with other organizations. Like we've been in touch with Dogs Trust and are working with them to create some leaflets around how to be a responsible dog owner, how to be mindful of other user groups in the park. And so hopefully we'll be producing some things that will be useful for all friends groups to be able to put up some signage. But another thing that that others have reported is useful is to do things like, obviously it depends on having the space and it being the appropriate environment for such a thing, but things like dog shows where you can get dog trainers in to kind of do a gentle push as to, okay, this is what being a responsible dog owner looks like, for those who maybe are slightly, clueless about what they ought to be doing. But yeah, I agree, it is difficult, and I'll let Ben answer on the nature side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you've got kind of to the crux of it there, Pat, in terms of that is the issue. But I think in the past, the way that that's been dealt with has been people one-to-one saying things, and I think that can sometimes be antagonistic from, well, maybe interpreted as being antagonistic from either side. And I think that often does lead to a negative kind of overall impact in terms of how both sides perceive that issue. So I think the reason why we went with this kind of strategy of having dog walkers engage other dog walkers is because at least there's that middle ground there, so people can actually understand that it's not just someone without a dog coming to tell me what I can and can't do, but it's someone who understands what dog ownership is all about and actually trying to have a proactive and productive conversation about an active solution and trying to raise some of those issues. So I think that's why we went with that option, and that's why we did it with, I mean, it ended up being quite lucky that I ended up getting a dog as well. So I could lead nature walks with a dog, which I think has helped. Even if it's quite hard to do, to multitask with rambunctious dog whilst walking, doing a nature talk, but it's all good fun. But then, yeah, and I think it was basically very much about just thinking about how you can act in a productive way. And I think what's been really good about those nature walks is we've then given those dog walkers leaflets, and they've engaged further afield, and they've gone out to their various communities and local groups and actually engaged in different ways. So we're kind of spreading the word, but through dog walkers, as opposed to through just a group of people on the river without a dog just there like for the day, which we can have productive conversations with people, and we have done successfully, particularly in recent months. I think the leaflet has helped as like an engagement piece, just to say, even if they don't read it, but it's a conversation starter to say, like, this is the reason we're doing it. And it flag posts like, why are you putting in this dead hedge here, as opposed to just something appearing overnight and people thinking, what on earth is this about? So yeah, I think that's kind of why we went with that option. So hopefully that kind of answers the question. Yeah.
And someone put in the chat that not all dog owners are like that, and that is absolutely quite right. And it's important to say, many of us here are dog owners. So, but I think part of it is also just about education. So while I think many of us, or hopefully all of us, know about picking up after our dog, for example, I had no idea about the flea treatment that I put on her neck and keeping her out of water for 5 days. So there's definitely stuff to be learned, I think, for all of us. But yeah, just want to do a quick check on time. The meeting was meant to go for an hour. Ben, do you have you got like 10 more minutes to answer questions, or do you need to shoot off?
I'll need to shoot at about 8, but I can answer a couple more if that's
Okay, so why don't we do Elena and Millie, and then there are some questions in the chat which I will record and I will send them to you by email and we can liaise that way. So if you've asked a question in the chat and I don't have your email address, just to be safe, why don't you pop your email address in the chat, just so I can definitely link you into an answer from Ben. So Elena.
More of a comment, I guess. It's just we're part of a wildlife group in North London. We're feeling a similar thing. We're feeling like we're needing a paradigm shift. And when we're talking to dog walkers, we're finding similar things about the birds. So I think it's hard to say this quickly, but we found that definitely the conversations we're having, I think as a collective, we can work together with the leaflets and kind of work together across London. We're finding an impact just in a small area in North London over a few parks just about the birds. So dog walkers have responded quite well. There is that few that are, and some of us work in psychology, so we understand there's a cycle. Some people see a high vis. As soon as they see the high vis jacket, they have a reaction to that, or they don't like being, but some people understand, even thank us. So I think most of it is really good. And again, thanks for all that. The leaflet feels really helpful. I'm rushing because I don't want to take up time, but I think we can be positive. It sounds like collectively we've hit this part here, and if we can work through it, we can. I'm saying this really quickly and briefly, but I think with the leaflet and slowly talking to people, we can make a change, like collectively. And it becomes the norm to be like this. It's not a civilized society to have your dog go and kill animals. It's really distressing, and I love dogs and I'm a dog owner. So we have positive impact. So anyway, thank you for everything you're doing. It's quick.
Thank you. Millie, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you for just reading out my comment. I think the only way to work is to be collaborative. And so comments from the lady, I felt it was a little bit, we've got to be really mindful of our tone of voice, our approach, and also be careful because, as we know, some dog owners are not particularly pleasant. So I totally agree, but do be mindful that a lot of us are very respectful of the environment and have the same view as well as that. So my main thing was, I'm really keen, Ben, I'm over in Cater Park and Alex Wreck. You may have seen the absolute tragedy, been all over the news this week. I can't talk without welling up, sorry. But I'm really desperate for some habitat monitoring tools. Our normal contact for biodiversity is unwell, and we desperately need to get some data together about the ecocide tragedy of the whole dog walking field, trees cutting down. I mean, I just wondered if on email you can chuck me something just to guide me. That would be amazing. And we have a dog event where we'd love you in September. Open arms, give you a tabletop and gazebo and let's help educate these people, because we need that. And we can take that on if you can't split yourself around London, we know.
Yeah, I'd love to come. Yeah, that sounds brilliant. Thank you. And yeah, the travesty in Cater Park is absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, sorry, that was really hard to talk about at the moment. Thank you everybody.
Colette, I would like to be in touch with you, because I would like, it's Jo Jekyll, I've given my email, because I think that's also comes down to letters to MPs and councillors, and I know from working for Bromley before ID Verdi took over that it's not the best, but I'm just wondering, I've written there, is it possible to prosecute for each single tree he cut down? And he's a solicitor's son. Ha.
To be fair, that council have really responded, and work is heavily underway, but we are after some biodiversity data to help our case, and that's where it's at.
Have you gone to Green Spaces and High Elms? Contact Sue Holland at High Elms.
Great. So I think we'll leave it there. So I will, like I said, I will take a note of any questions that are in the comment in the chat, and liaise with Ben to get an answer for you. Thank you so much, Ben, for the really insightful and interesting presentation. It's great to hear about what's being done with water voles, but also just broader implications with nature and dog owners and walkers and that kind of thing. And thank you everyone for attending today and for your great questions and feedback. It's really helpful. If you want to stay on for the working group meeting, I think we're going to make it a super quick one, because we've only got, well, we were meant to finish at 8, so I think it might just be sort of a placeholder for next time. But if you'd like to be involved, stay on and I'll take down your details, and you can get involved with the group. We meet sort of 3 or 4 times a year, and the idea is to help deliver presentations like this and work with other groups that are involved with dogs to try to try to deliver the best solution for everyone who wants to use a green or a blue space. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and stay on if you want to be part of the group.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Have a good
Thanks,
evening.
Ben.
Bye-bye.